So let's get started. We're going to talk about how you get deeper insight using blended research. And one of the most interesting parts about this, from my perspective anyway, is the whole idea of small sample. And I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a long, long time, and frequently we run into small situations with small sample. And today I want to expand that and help you think about situations where in almost any industry that we run into, we may deal with small samples. So one of the main things that we're trying to understand from SCIM's perspective a lot of times is really understanding what someone's journey looks like. So over the course of any journey, we have lots of decisions to make, and there are, as consumers, and there are situations where companies can actually influence decisions that we make or insert themselves, and the decision, sometimes the process changes and the journey looks a little bit different. So kind of keep in mind the idea of a journey, whether it's a patient journey or a consumer journey or a decision maker journey. And the idea of small sample, which I think is interesting, our world really is full of small samples. Anytime you are trying to look at a journey, and you're trying to look at a particular point in that journey, by definition you have narrowed the field. So I think that's important to keep in mind. We're going to talk about three main things. Finding that small sample, which again, if it's a bit tricky, we have some clever ways to do it, I think. How to really gain those deep insights, and that's when we'll talk about the blended methods. And three, how do we make sure that those deep insights get all the way back to the client? So before we start, I'd like to talk about a format that we've used before, which is online bulletin boards. And some of you probably know about these, so just kind of a couple of bullet points at the beginning. It's really not a free-for-all. Yes, it is online, but it's recruited traditionally. They're professional moderators, and it's a very kind of comfortably anonymous format. So I don't know how many of you have actually participated in those before, but I'll do kind of a quick overview. It's really online boards started out as kind of, oh, we've got the internet and we can do all these cool things with it, and we started doing focus groups online. What we've discovered over the past, I'd say probably 10 years, is that online boards are a really fabulous way to be in more than one place, literally at the same time. So yes, it can't be one person in more than one place at one time, but it can be you conducting a study in more than one place at one time. And there's a particular study that I've got in the back of my mind in which we were actually in 10 countries all at once, and they're highlighted on this map so you can see. And we were actually in all these places at once for about 2 weeks. So the online bulletin board has really changed over the last probably decade. We can ask respondents to be online for a week, maybe log in a couple of times a day, maybe for 3 days, a couple of times a day. We've even done studies that have gone as long as 6 months, and people logged in for once a week. So lots of different options there. So a couple more things about just the format, the platform of the online bulletin boards. We do find that we can keep respondents engaged longer. We find that participants, well, and we are not limited by participants' geography, I guess more to the point. And because we have more time with people, we can really get to deeper levels of information and probe for things that we might not have thought about at the beginning, maybe weren't presented to us at the beginning by the respondents, and start to turn up later. And there's very much a longitudinal aspect to an online bulletin board, which we find really, really helpful. So again, I don't want you to lose sight of they're professionally recruited, they're professionally moderated. It's not a free-for-all, a very controlled environment. So let's start out and talk about the small sample. And like I said, my background is in a lot of pharma work and some B2B work as well. So I started to think about what are the various small samples that we run into. So for instance, if you were a financial services company and you were looking for a high net worth investor who for some reason or another was looking to modify her portfolio, it might be one thing to find a high net worth investor. They're out there. They're not that easy to find, but they're out there. if you start looking for somebody who is at a decision point, at a turning point, at a place where you can insert yourself as an organization and go, oh, you know what, we'd like to change her process, that's a small sample. If you were a manufacturer of spirits and you were looking for a beer connoisseur who just recently was introduced to a new microbrew, for instance, or, you know, extrapolate from here, again, it might be one thing to find these people, but to find them at this particular point is tricky. And again, from the pharmaceutical perspective, any patient who's in the midst of what is called in the industry a drug holiday is a tricky person to find. Never mind that you've got people in some cases in orphan diseases or other small indications. So finding small sample can be kind of tricky. And we like to think about these, you know, we have the expression of a needle in a haystack. These are not just a needle in a haystack. This is a needle in fields of haystacks. So finding them can be really very much a challenge. So the first thing to start with, and the study that I mentioned earlier, which did go on for almost 8 months, respondents were all on for 6 weeks each, not every day, but a couple of times a week, is to start a study with an understanding of how tricky it is going to be to find these people. So rather than going in and going, oh, it's going to be a snap, we just got to get the screener done, then we can play with the discussion guide, which is always more fun for everybody anyway. Really thinking about how you're going to find these people. And it is substantially easier now than it was 10 years ago to find people like this. We do have access to, you know, the entirety of all human knowledge, it seems, on the internet. And so we have access to people that we're trying to find. So there are, in pharma, there tend to be patient support groups. In almost any category that could be of interest to you, whether it's frequent flyers or right disease sufferers or aficionados of a particular food or wine or spirit, you can find those people online. So the trick is to find those places that they congregate naturally. And then you're not going to actually set up shop right there. You're not. You're going to go ahead and, again, recruit them and bring them in to your own, again, to your own format so that you have some control over what takes place there. But starting with that flexibility and understanding of what's involved is going to help you tremendously, because it's not going to be a 2-week recruit. It may be an over a period of time. The 6-month study that we did, we actually, the reason it went on for 6 months is because we knew it would be very difficult to find these people, and we wanted to give ourselves time every 2 weeks to kind of refresh and go, okay, what's changed? How do we find these people now? So having that flexibility, having that understanding of what it's going to take, and knowing that we're not going to relax the recruiting standards. This is very much a marathon and not kind of a quick foot race. This is staying in it, knowing that if we can get these deep insights from these people, it will be really valuable, and knowing that these people are not going to be hard, not going to be easy to find. So how do we gain those deep insights, and how do we really use those blended methods? What does a blended method really look like? So when we say blended method, we do mean a combination of qualitative and quantitative. So one of the things that we do is really just a more traditional approach. So you can work with more traditional Q&A, but make sure that you do some probing. And then I'm going to show you how we kind of combine that in-depth probing with some exercises, because the exercises can really be a lot of fun. And especially when we're in the midst of a qualitative study, being able to kind of liven it up. I think when people are going through a 40-minute or 30-minute or even 20-minute survey online where they have to click radio buttons and they have to do sliding scales, it kind of gets dull after a while. Well, it's the same thing with qual. Even when you have a moderator who's really engaged and you know that she's looking forward to hearing from you the next time you hop onto the board, it can still get tiring if all you do is Q&A. So we've used a lot of different methods, and SCIM's our own background, our historical kind of presence has been conjoint. So we can use various tools. We've used MaxDiff kind of as a conversation tool to get things started a little bit. And again, if you have been in the midst of kind of asking questions and getting responses and probing further. To have something like this thrown in there really kind of livens it up a lot, makes it very different. It's a lot of fun. And it's a starting point. I mean, that's the thing I want you to understand, is that it's not a be-all, end-all. This is, oh, we've got a cool exercise for you to do, and you can play with it, and it's very different from what they've been doing up until that point. And so, cool, I get to play with this. Is it something that you're going to try to grab everything together and extrapolate the results? Probably not. Probably not. You're going to use it more as a jumping off point for more discussion, maybe comparing and contrasting, maybe really just kind of a thought starter. You can do clickable graphics and markup exercises, again, as part of a very traditional qual approach and a kind of a lengthier one, a longitudinal one. You can still go, you know what, we got something for you to play with. And again, it does turn out to be very entertaining for respondents. We've used sorting exercises, including kind of a drag and drop approach that you can see here. Again, a lot of fun for people if that's not what they're doing full time. If all of a sudden you go, oh, okay, now we've got something completely different for you. And that is very much something that we're trying to think about as we go through a more longitudinal qual study, is how do we keep people engaged? This is a great, great way to keep people engaged and really push them in a kind of a different direction. And sometimes we get insights here that you wouldn't get from a traditional Q&A. We have people build collages online. Just about, this is actually, you can probably, maybe you can't imagine, so I'll tell you, it's from a study about constipation, so very much in the pharmaceutical arena. Some of these images I find pretty disturbing. Again, the sort of thing that you might not get if you just brought people in for a limited period of time. But again, with that longitudinal approach and offering them a lot of different ways to express themselves, you get a lot of insight. So how do we, once we've kind of let people play with different approaches and gotten a lot of insight and done all our probing, how do we make sure that the clients get those same deep insights, which is obviously crucially important? There is so much data that comes in through these online bulletin boards, and if any of you have participated in them before, you know this. It can be really overwhelming in some ways. So how do we make sure that we avoid getting mired, and so that we can deliver those deep insights? Well, it's a timing thing. It's a preparation thing. It's a process through the entire study. So, but let's start at the beginning, which is with preparation, where we really insist for ourselves that we create a draft insights report before the research ever starts. So it's very much the Stephen Covey approach of beginning with the end in mind. Okay, it's nothing new. It's just even more important, I find, with this approach and with these longitudinal studies than any other. And the other thing I think to think about it is with the small samples, you're not going to do this. This is not something you're going to run every 10 minutes or every year or every 6 months. This is something that was hard to find them. It'll be hard to find them the next time. So you really want to get what's valuable out of here. So we create a draft insights report before we even begin, and we really kind of lay out some hypotheses, what we expect to hear, what we don't expect to hear, what we'd love to hear, any kind of random things that we want to make sure that we understand. And we're really, really starting with, what is the client's business question, right? So what do we need to know to move that forward? And it's qualitative research, so we want to make sure that we leave some room for serendipity. So, but by creating that draft insight report before we even begin, we can use that as a template and start there and essentially plug the information in as we get it, and then start to do the analysis, which is when the insights start to occur. So preparation is really, really important, and thinking about the path that people might follow, again, these hypotheses, these hunches that you may have starting in, of going, okay, we know we start here, we see that some people end up here, so there's a fork in the road here, so what's going to happen? And with the draft insights report, starting to go, okay, we have hunches that it may go this direction, at least hypothesizing these ideas. Maybe that's not what turns out to happen, but thinking about what's going to happen at each fork in the road. And from there, we're going to go on and execute. We, in the past, have used the discussion guide as a fairly iterative process. Easier to do in a 6 or 9 month study, a little harder to do in a 3-day board. Nevertheless, make sure that you continue to use what you're hearing to make that discussion guide as useful as it can be. And part of the way that you do that is you make sure that, and I'll start at the bottom actually, is that you have as frequent report templates as you need to have. Sometimes they're weekly, sometimes they're actually daily. We've even had debriefs on a twice daily basis. So, excuse me, make sure that you're getting that information captured because it will catch up with you with this kind of platform. So make sure that you're getting that information captured as you go so that you can look at it and kind of lay it out in front of yourself and go, okay, what am I seeing? What are the similarities? What are the differences? What did I not expect to hear at all? And in tandem with that, in concert with that, make sure that you're debriefing daily or weekly if that's appropriate, if it's a longer study, both with the moderators and the clients. What we have found in these studies is that we set up the schedule of debriefing well before the field work actually begins. And we are on a regular basis sitting down and going, okay, this is what we've heard. This is what we think it means. In a multi-country study, we're saying, did you hear this in France? Did you hear this in Australia? Did you hear that in the United States? And if we heard it a couple of places but not all the places, it's something where we, in that debrief with the moderators, can take it back to the board and ask the respondents about it. Sometimes clients see things that we don't necessarily see and that certainly respondents don't see, and they'll add ideas too. And they'll say, okay, you know, this is interesting. We saw this little nugget and it makes us think about something else that we know that's happening internally. We can then, with these regular debriefs, we have kind of a continuous feedback loop, which works really, really well. So the client gives us an idea. We pop that into the board as some sort of a question. We hear from the moderators how the response came out, and it's another nugget that we then have to feed, that we are then able to feed back to the clients. So when you're executing, there's a certain amount of agility that has to happen so that you can iterate, and there's a certain amount of structure that's required so that you make sure that you have the ability to be agile later. So we talked about the continuous feedback loop. It's both a feedback loop for the client and the moderators, I find, as well as for the respondents to a certain degree, because we are noticing things that they may not notice even by themselves or even with a smaller group of people with whom they're online. But especially if something's happening in multiple countries or in multiple markets, it's something where we can bring back to the board and go, you know, this is something we saw that was interesting. Do you guys see this too? So it can be both a feedback loop from the client kind of moderator perspective and a feedback loop just even within the board. And last, but possibly most importantly, delivering the insights. And depending on the length of the study, making sure that you have some sort of interim reports. Again, for the 6 to 9 month study that we conducted, 9 months is 3/4 of the year, not to, you know, do simple math for you, but it's easy for people on the inside to lose track of what's going on. So it's really crucial, we have found, to have regular feedback times. For the study that the one that I refer to as the 6 to 9 months, it really ended up being about 8.5 months. And we had 4 different debrief times, 4 different times that we actually sat down with the client and said, here's what we understand to be happening, here's some interesting insights, here's some stuff that we want to feedback, in addition to a weekly touch base that we had with them. So if you can imagine that, did we always use the time weekly? No, we didn't. Sometimes there was a recruiting update, it took 2 minutes, and then we were gone. But sometimes we were in the midst of some really interesting field work, and so we had that time devoted already. But we also, not only that, we delivered to her internal team some feedback to keep them engaged, to keep them interested in what was going on, and make sure that we stayed on target. You can divide things different ways in terms of delivery. So in some cases, respondent By respondent is kind of an interesting way to look at things. Sometimes by country is an interesting way to look at things. That's something that you start to discover as you do your analysis early in the study, and then really think about from the client's perspective, how is it going to be most useful for them. So, delivering. And I guess I want to leave you with the idea that in some cases you can really get some very deep thoughts, and even when you don't really expect them. This is actually a tree that one of the respondents drew for us and posted online, and you can see her quote, "It feels like the winter season for me, cold, barren, and not much color. Gray and white represent this season of my life." And that's actually a longer, there's more to that quote. But it's the sort of depth that I think staying with respondents over a longer period of time, you start to get, again, those deeper insights about who they are, what makes them tick, more context, which is something that we're always seeking with qualitative approaches, more context so that as the client, you can really look at it and go, oh, I now product in the larger context of their lives. And knowing that larger context, just like all relationships, deepens it. So, and we'll let you look at this last one as it goes. Again, a pharmaceutical example. This is an exchange that somebody described on the board that she had with her husband, I think her boyfriend. And here's her quote: "He's always concerned. He's calling me at work in the middle of the day just to check on me. And at first I felt well cared for. Now I just feel like the sick person in his life, and I hate that, being the sick one. I want to be fun and vibrant and sexy in his eyes, and it feels like my shine is worn off." The sort of thing that I haven't heard in 15 years of moderating. I don't hear every day in in-depth interviews, and I don't hear every day, certainly in focus groups. But sticking with people for a long period of time starts to get you, I think, to a deeper level of insight. So we wanted to make sure that we prepared you for how to do that, and happy to answer any questions that you have.